Kenyatta is on a state visit to South Africa, will be hosted by his South African counterpart, President Cyril Ramaphosa, at the Union Buildings. Dr. Kingsley Makhubela is the founding member of RiskRecon Consulting, but he wears many hats, amongst them a former chief of staff at the Department of International Relations and also former ambassador to Kenya. Dr. Makhubela, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you, Desiree. Good morning.
Now, Kenya is a significant player in the East African economic space. Why is it significant to South Africa?
Well, Kenya is an important trading partner for South Africa in the East African region. But most importantly, Kenya has gone through some turbulence period with respect to terrorism attacks and so on. So my hope is that as President Kenyatta visits this country, he would share with South Africa their experience of dealing with a rough neighborhood. We've seen last week the attack in Uganda by ISIS. And the lessons I think that we ought to learn from Kenya as a country is as we commit our troops in foreign countries, we must prepare ourselves at home, because the modus operandi of the same group that Kenya has had problems with is that they target soft targets back home. So I think there are lessons that we can learn from Kenya in terms of how they've dealt with that, the challenges now in Ethiopia and Abyei. And Kenya is a very, very big economy in the region. I think they rate about $98 billion in terms of trade. We've had telecommunication presence in Kenya. So there's an expectation that as we interact with Kenya, there are certain issues that we ought to manage, particularly on the security front. I'm glad to hear Sophie saying that there will be discussion around security arrangement. I think that's the most crucial part of this visit, and that's what Kenya can bring to us.
There's always a question about mutually beneficial outcomes. Where do you see those areas?
The mutually beneficial outcome, Desiree, it speaks to a variety of issues. Cooperation brings mutually beneficially. As we get South African investing in Kenya, the Kenyans will have been benefiting from South African investment to a large extent. But trade in the last few years has been skewed in favor of South Africa. But there are job creation in Kenya. But I think we can also benefit from Kenyans' knowledge in terms of dealing with the rough neighborhood. The challenges in Mozambique now of the ISIS presence in northern part of Mozambique is something that we can benefit a great deal. And you cannot put any monetary value on security arrangement and the risk related to that. I think that's where we're going to benefit in the long run. But at the economic level, the cooperation that exists between us and Kenya is something that benefits both countries.
The intra-Africa conversations that's just wrapping up in KwaZulu-Natal, no doubt a conversation about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement will creep in, even though this is a bilateral meeting.
Absolutely. Kenya has been in the East African community. Kenya has some of the countries that are members of SADC. There's a dual overlapping. So there are really serious issues of integration that exist between some countries in East Africa and Southern Africa. And you remember, Desiree, the AU protocol that speaks about strengthening REEs will become part of this discussion, because as we look at the integration of the African continent economically and the decisions that were taken by the heads of state sometimes last year would have an effect in terms of the implementation, how we're going to move beyond setting up structures and implementing these free trade arrangements and dealing with the barriers that exist. Some of them basic barriers, some of them really unnecessary barriers that we need to manage as countries. And I think this will feature prominently on the discussions. I know since my time in Kenya, the Kenyans have been worried about the visa arrangement. That movement of people between countries is an important ingredient in terms of facilitating some of the arrangements, the trade, the tourism. As you know, Kenya, it's a huge tourist destination in terms of safari. How do we complement some of these issues, and how do we allow free movement? And given the fact that we are both long destinations, Kenya and South Africa, how do we deal with the barriers related to that? I think these issues will feature in the discussion, and I hope they will.
You talk about the facilitation of trade. How do you imagine technological advancements and the digital world could have changed or impacted on the bilateral conversations? What, with new ways being found to move goods and transact, we're not using traditional modes anymore. How will this conversation manifest in this meeting?
Desiree, we ourselves and Kenya, we were a few years ago, we were part of the discussion at the World Economic Forum, where the fourth industrial revolution issues were really discussed and how can they facilitate trade. And that discussion was taken to the AU too. But at the bilateral level, as I'm saying, communication has been an important part. And the strides that Kenya has made, and we're catching up now. Remember, Kenya is the first country to introduce M-Pesa, the transfer of money using mobile telephones. So there's a lot that we can learn from Kenya that we can share with Kenyans. We have Safaricom, which is an integral part of the Vodacom group that we belong to. So there's a need to have better discussion around the facilitation of technology and the movement of technology across. A few years ago, we loaned Kenya a lot of locomotives to move their products from Mombasa to the inland. So there will be a discussion around how do you manage the port systems and so on. The transfer and sharing of technologies is a crucial part of a free trade agreement. And I think once we agree on some of these critical issues of technology, it will really facilitate better movement of goods between the two countries.
And two very important conversations taking place at the moment, the global conversation on climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. How will these translate in these conversations?
Kenya remains a host of the UN Environmental Agency, and we are an integral part of that, and South Africa is accredited to that from Nairobi. So that's crucial part in terms of, the crucial discussion within the environmental space now is equal but differentiated responsibilities. How do we help emerging countries to catch up with managing the emission without destroying their economies? And that debate is raging in this country. There are different views even within the government in terms of how should we handle that. And I think our views, as we discuss with Kenya, it will be important to have a consolidated views about how do we move on these issues. Do we start to shut down our coal mines now to accept 131 billion that is being offered? Is it going to make a huge change? But where is the principle of equal but differentiated responsibilities? Remember, the developed countries, they reach their level of development emitting a lot. South Africa is not within the top 50 of emitters in the world. We will need to manage that. But we understand our responsibility in terms of changing the manner in which we do companies, business, and coming up with new technologies and accepting the transfers of technologies. There's an entity within the World Environmental Organization in Nairobi called the GEF that looks into the movement of technology across countries to ensure that we meet the target of our own, it's 1.something% that we need to reduce the emission around. But the greater responsibility still lies with developed countries.
Of course, these are presidents' meetings, so these are high-level conversations. But how do they translate into benefit for citizens?
It's the implementation of decisions that are taken at the summit level. Summits, it's a meeting of the heads of state, remains a crucial diplomatic tool. The decisions that are taken at the presidential level, they have the potential to be fast-tracked in terms of implementation. This is where you see different ministries that are participating in this bilateral discussions. And this ministry's participation, is essentially to go and implement decisions that are taken by heads of state. And I think they'll be focusing on the implementation. And I'm glad in terms of this administration, there's been a lot of discussion about implementation instead of policy development. We have enough policies, but I think the discussion here should move towards the implementation. I think Kenya has a vast resource in terms of the glass making that we can export. Kenya has the potential in terms of allowing better integration in the area, given the port of Mombasa and how huge it is. And we can utilize that not only for our own benefit only, but for the regional integration. and economic integration of the continent.
And lastly, Ambassador Makhubela, just in terms of social interaction, how should South Africans be engaging with Kenyans at a human level?
This country, for many years, we've taken a decision. If you see the kudos that are sold in this country, these products that are coming from East Africa, they are sold in this country duty-free. And that is part of understanding in terms of the cultural exchange. And they are coming from all over West Africa and East Africa. We have had that arrangement. We have had an arrangement in terms of sharing of ideas and knowledge. Universities are starting to integrate, to share. And I think as we foster this kind of social and cultural institutions, it would help to foster better understanding amongst our people, South Africans and the Kenyans, to understand that the world is bigger than South Africa and the world is bigger than Kenya, and the continent is bigger than the two countries. And how do we cooperate to foster cooperation and better understanding and to deal with some of the ills and the challenges that are related with this integration? Integration is a painful thing. We've seen in Europe the challenges they're going through, but we need to ensure that we educate our own people. We take our people with us as we talk about this regional integration at the social and the political level. So it's crucial to do that. But there are instruments. We have a large, vibrant Kenyan community in this country, both at the academia that are providing teaching. I mean, some of my professors in this country were from Kenya. The foreign minister of Kenya at one stage, she was part of teaching academics in this country. So there is a platform in terms of fostering social cohesion that will create better understanding and better trade and better sharing of knowledge between the two countries.
Oh, it makes sense now why the foreign minister was saying to Sophie, it's good to be back.
Absolutely.
Let's thank you for your time this morning.
Friend, a wonderful lady. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kingsley Makhubela is the founding member of RiskRecon Consulting and also a former chief of staff at the Department of International Relations and former ambassador to Kenya.